Hello, and welcome to everybody for joining today's Tech Community Live discussion of troubleshooting devices. I'm Dave Randall, and I'll be your host today, and I'm joined by three of my colleagues. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Thanks, Dave. My name is Joe Lurie. I am a product manager on the customer acceleration team. We call that the CAT team. And I help my customers with Intune. I find out why they're not deploying Intune when I think they should be. And I find out how they're using Intune because some of you all use it a little bit differently than we had planned to use it. So I get all that feedback as well. I'm here with Liz, and Liz can introduce herself.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Cox. I am part of the Intune product group. I work on a lot of different things, but right now I'm mostly focused on our data platform and kind of building out different data gaps we have in Intune so we can provide you folks with more data to help with your device management. And then I'll hand it over to Zineb.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Zineb. I am very excited to be here. I'm a product manager on Intune as well, focused on our advanced endpoint analytics capabilities. So everything from anomaly detection, device scopes to device timeline. Very happy to be here and answer any questions about that and how you can leverage those features for your troubleshooting.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. So I didn't do a very good introduction of myself. I'm also in the Intune engineering group like Liz and Zineb, and one of the areas of focus that I have is our ServiceNow integration. And so for device troubleshooting, we may end up getting a couple of questions. If not, I can talk a little bit about some of the things that ServiceNow integration is all about. As well, I am also responsible for our API on Graph and our automation story. So if you have questions today about that, I may jump in, even though I'm the host and I'm asking the questions of the experts in the room. I may jump in and answer a question or two as well if you have them around either ServiceNow, Graph, or even RBAC. I think I may have a little bit of recollection of some RBAC stuff. So sometimes RBAC comes into the troubleshooting space as well. So with all of our introductions out of the way, we've got the first question from Tin. And I really love that this is diving right into the middle of troubleshooting to get us kicked off for our session. So the question is, what is the root cause of the error while enrolling macOS via the company portal? I get this issue unable to confirm setting after I had installed the MDM profile, and it looks like the company portal app cannot push the status to Intune. How to check it from the technical side? And I know that
I was going to say what I think is I saw this question earlier in the reporting and analytics session, and I see it in this session, and I know, Tim, that it's a troubleshooting session, and a troubleshooting question. But our next session is on Apple management, and I really think that when Andy and Arnab see that question, they're going to jump on it and be able to answer it. So I don't want to toss this over the fence to the Apple session, but I really think you're going to get the best answer when Andy takes a look at this question.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that was an official toss it over to the next session, even though you said you didn't quite want to do that, Joe.
I don't want to do that, but I do think that's where you'll get the best answer. Yeah. I mean, otherwise, we know that there are some issues with enrollment for various reasons, but so it's too hard to just say this failed through company portal because we know that there are log files you can look at on the device and on the in console, but they may not be specific. And I think someone on the Apple side of things could really break that down. Maybe they've seen it before, they've talked to their customers, they work with support and whatnot.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Question or a request from Joe. Could we get a way to add additional folders and files to be collected with device diagnostics? For example, we currently send the install logs using /l*v on MSI installs for all application installs to a specific folder. It'd be great to be able to have those collected as well when collecting device diagnostics. Love that.
Yeah, I can take this one. Yes, potentially. Not necessarily part of Collect Diagnostics, but as I mentioned, we're kind of building out the kind of data that you can collect. So these are the kinds of capabilities we're definitely looking at. And I would say keep an eye out for some announcements coming at Ignite, and you'll learn a little bit more about that.
So I know that we do have the device diagnostics file collection right now. So you're saying that's not extensible by customers today, but sounds like that's something that we've heard a lot of feedback, not only, doing install logs, but potentially other areas of information that would be great to gather and pull along with the with either with the device diagnostic log collection or maybe via another way. So great. Look, I think that's a great suggestion to look forward to Ignite. For all of you who are anxiously awaiting Ignite, I know that Ignite is coming up in November. I want you to keep your eye open for registration for Ignite. A little hint, it's probably going to look a lot like it did last year in terms of the format, but rest assured that the Intune team is going to have a great presence at Ignite and be able to give you lots of new information about what's coming, as well as answer questions there.
And all the blogs that we release around the Ignite timeframe, right? So we have the keynotes on the first day of Ignite, right in the beginning, and then all of a sudden you see our tech community blogs, and you see our Microsoft blogs and stories blogs, and so everything, like even the stuff Liz is talking about, even if you can't make it to Ignite or you can't join us virtually for Ignite, you can still get all that information from the blogs that we release at the same time.
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Joe. All right, Nitin has a question from LinkedIn. Why can't we deploy MSI packages for particular devices instead of user IDs?
It's a good question. We have so many ways to deploy apps, whether it's a Win32 app, an LOB app. We have the store apps, so many different ways to deploy apps, some to devices, some to users. It's a good question. I'd love to find out more on why you're looking to deploy to a device versus to a user. Intune is pretty much, it's a user-based subscription solution, just like Office is and Windows, and these are user subscriptions. So I'd be interested in finding out why you want to deploy to a device as opposed to a user. So we can probably unpack that a little bit. Maybe you can ping me offline. Just a direct message within tech community would be great. Or LinkedIn, actually. This came from LinkedIn. You can direct message me in LinkedIn.
All right. Question from Sebastian. Is there a simple or fast way for checking single registry entries on the whole bunch of devices? Sure, there could be ways with remediation and results written in log analytics and so on, but maybe there's a quicker way for this.
I mean, I think I would say the answer is no, not yet. Yeah, we kind of, like you alluded to in the question, there's other sort of workaround ways that sounds like you're familiar with to do this. In terms of being able to do it in an easier, more accessible way, that's not something that there's really a trick for in Intune right now, but definitely great feedback and something that we're looking into.
You said not yet. Now it's going to be my answer as well. Not yet. Again, stay tuned, because we have a lot of cool stuff we're working on, including things that'll help with that. Even if it's on a device by device basis as opposed to bulk, we're working on a lot of great stuff in Intune. So not yet is a great answer. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and we know it's coming soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Joe and Liz. And for everyone in the audience as well, aka.ms/Intune feedback is a great place for you to submit detailed questions or suggestions, things that you find either difficult or frustrating, things that you're happy about, things that you love that we've done. We really like both sides of the equation on the feedback. So feel free to send us whatever's on your mind, whether it's about the console, whether it's about devices, about managing them. All of that is fair game. All right, feedback from tech community. Would it be possible to add functionality to Intune similar to the Defender's console live response? It allows you to connect to a remote computer and get a command line where you can run commands and scripts, similar to PowerShell remoting, but it doesn't need the computers to be on an internal network.
I like that, and I'll let Liz and Zineb comment as well. I like that idea. It's almost like the right-click tools you could do in Configuration Manager, where you could connect to a device and run a command. Again, I like that idea. I would go to Intune feedback and submit that idea for us. aka.ms Intune feedback that we just had up on the screen, because it's a good idea, and I do like your thinking there. One thing that David mentioned earlier is one of the tools he's working on is a ServiceNow integration with remote help. And so remote help could actually help with some of this, where you could connect to the device and run, but of course it does need you to connect to the device, a physical, actual connect to the device and see the remote screen and run the command. But I think it's a good point to bring up. I don't know if anyone else had any other comments there.
There is also a tool which allows you to remotely run commands and view information, view live details. It's actually oriented towards servers. So if you take a look for Windows Server, I'll see if I can come up with the exact one, but it's a tool that allows you to view your server fleet. You can run remote commands on them, and it works over the internet. So that's a free tool that's available today. It's not natively integrated with the Intune console, but it is a tool that allows you to do that in a centralized way, run remote commands. All right. Anyone else have thoughts, Liz or Zineb, on that one? Okay. So next one, question from Rupert. Our biggest issue is devices randomly failing compliance, and the error messages are typically vague. Is compliance failure debug going to get better?
Yeah, I'm going to say yes, it is, because I know that Tyler, who's one of the PMs that works on this, is always looking to make compliance better. Everything from compliance reporting to, I know sometimes when you look at the compliance, it'll say non-compliant because of system, but system's kind of irrelevant here. And so you think, so it is really compliant. So we're constantly looking at how to filter out the non-compliance things to make the compliant device actually show as compliant. So yes, it's going to get better. Yes, we're constantly working on how we're reporting the compliance and actions for non-compliance and things like that. Are a constant, always thinking about how to make that better.
Yeah. I think I would totally echo that answer. And the only thing I'd add there too is part of that sometimes is even just sort of a kind of a data issue. So there can be data inconsistencies where the device is showing up as non-compliant for a certain reason, but then that's not actually matching what it shows at different places in the console. So that's definitely something we're looking at as well, making the data more consistent across different places you see it in the console, and also just more fresh, less out of date data. So that will definitely help on that.
That's a good point, Liz. And maybe for our audience, it might be helpful to understand just a little bit about the back end. We have live data that comes in from the devices, and oftentimes that live data is summarized. And that summarization happens on a schedule in the background. Some of the things that you see in the console are summarized data. Some of them are pulling from the live data. So sometimes there's a little bit of an inconsistency there. And I think, from a compliance perspective, because those compliance policy pieces of information get pulled from devices on a polling basis, sometimes it's a little bit out of date. It can be frustrating to see, you've got a device that's out of compliance, but it hasn't been summarized and shown correctly. So good point, Liz.
Yeah, and I think some of it's even just the transparency. So, it can be advantageous to have places where you're pulling near real-time data, and also places where you're relying on the cache data. And, right now we're just not really labeling it as much. And so we know that's a pain point for customers. And so if we can kind of provide that information of how up to date this data is, then that can really help in these kinds of scenarios.
Absolutely.
Yep.
All right. Ruben's got a question. What is the simplest way to automatically add, either scripting or programmatically, a Windows machine to a dynamic or assigned group from the client side? This is for automatic policy assignment associated with the group immediately after Intune enrollment. So this is I think this kind of gets to a common technique that customers who've been using Configuration Manager for a long time use. You want to add a device to a collection to get applications or policy deployed as quickly as possible. So any suggestions from you on the best way or the simplest way to add a Windows machine to a dynamic or assigned group from the client side?
By definition, you can't manually add to a dynamic group. That's by definition a dynamic group gets added because of whatever the thing is you asked it to, geo, whatever the
rule,
whatever it is, with the role. So by definition, you can't add to a dynamic group. It happens as the group refresh happens, which admittedly is a little bit slow in Entra ID, in Azure AD. But to an assigned group, I'm actually not familiar with any way from the client to add to an Azure AD group outside of running a script. That might be a PowerShell script to add to a group. Dave or Sanab, Liz?
Yeah, well, I suppose my question might be, what enrollment method are you using? Because I think, when it comes to programmatically adding a device to a dynamic group at enrollment time, usually we kind of rely on naming templates for that. So when you're setting up either your Autopilot profile, or even if you're doing something like using provisioning packages, I'm not sure exactly what you're doing, you can usually kind of design some kind of naming template that will then funnel that device into the proper dynamic group.
The other thing that is possible, like Joe mentioned, you could run a PowerShell script. So there is a Microsoft Graph SDK-based PowerShell module, and that covers a lot of the capabilities for Azure AD group membership. And the challenge that you may end up having is for all of your end users, if you're running this on end user, you're going to have the right permissions to be able to add members to the group. And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for doing something like the PowerShell module. So I think those are the ideas that we've got. But I do like Liz's suggestion around kind of focusing on the enrollment piece and just making sure that everything is set as clearly as possible, so that post-enrollment, Intune does the right thing. All right, next question is from Rajesh on LinkedIn. Is there any way to get detailed information about MAM protection unmanaged BYOD devices? Currently, only sign-in logs and app protection reports are there, which is not very detailed.
I think it would, I don't know what kind of information you're looking for. I mean, these are unmanaged devices, so we very purposely can't get a lot of information off of them. There's privacy issues with that. So what we get from them is, it's an enrolled user account. So we get some user information and we know what apps they're running, but there's very little information we're allowed to take after that. I think, again, we'd have to unpack what you're looking to achieve, the reason to get this extra information on an unmanaged device and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Question from Alexander coming from Tech Community. Recently, my organization ran into an issue with Intune web content filtering, unintentionally filtering a required site. When we added the site to the allow list, this did not seem to resolve the issue. We eventually had to turn off the specific category filtering that was blocking the site in question. My question is there a better way to filter web content through Intune, or is there a way to better refine the allowed blocked content?
That's an interesting one. I guess my first question is what policies they were setting there, if those were like browser policies they were setting, both for the initial content filtering and the allow list. And if they were the same, because if it was just kind of a browser level allow list versus the full level content filtering, that might have been the issue. Yeah, I think we kind of have to learn more there.
So you talked about a couple of different ways. Do you have any thoughts on just best practices for either of those two methods? Like how would we recommend, in this case, how do we recommend to Alexander, what should be his first best choice?
Yeah, I do think that the sort of the Intune web content filtering over the browser level would be a better choice. And I think, but the biggest thing I would say is making sure that allow list and the initial kind of configuration of the filtering are matching. And maybe that's what's happening and it's still not working. In which case that's probably a bug that we should address. But I think kind of just making sure they match is the biggest thing I would say.
Gotcha. All right. Thanks, Liz. So next feedback from Xaba. Sometimes, and this is feedback, which absolutely I love. It was a little bit easier than going to the aka.ms/Intune feedback, because here you are, you can just provide it directly to the folks in the team. So feedback is, sometimes it's pretty hard to debug configuration conflicts in the case of hybrid join co-managed devices. From Intune, you're not really able to collect the information on why a configuration is failing or what other configuration it's conflicting with, just some generic or maybe misleading info.
Yeah, so I know a lot of our customers and probably you, Xaba, and thank you for joining us. I saw that you're also on the last episode, so thank you. And I hope to see you on the next one as well, and the final one. But so a lot of our customers are so used to group policy over the last 23 years and using RSOP, I think came out in 2003. So RSOP, the resultant set of policies, where you can see what happens. Here's all the policies assigned to a device. Here's what might be conflicting. Here's why. And I think so many customers are so used to that RSOP, and then they come in Intune and we don't have resultant set of policies. Not yet. So stay tuned, because this is something that I can't give you a time frame. I'd love to say at Ignite, but I doubt it. So no time frame promised by, my name is not really Joe Lurie, it's Matt Call. So I know that I got the wrong name right there. So we are working on an Intune like RSOP. It is something that we're working on.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add in something in here. So in endpoint analytics, one of our advanced features would be device timeline. So it's per device, you're able to see all those signals that are affecting your device, whether that's like an app crash, an app hang, a reboot, or logons. And this is actually really good feedback for us to see what are those like kind of like signals that you're looking for related to policies, compliance and config policies. Would you like to see like what are those settings that are failing, conflicting settings? So very appreciate that feedback.
Awesome. Next question from LinkedIn. We have integrated ServiceNow with Intune using out of the box. How do I perform a selective wipe of MAM unmanaged devices from ServiceNow or Graph API?
Dave, I'm going to throw that one right back to you.
ServiceNow.
I was going to say,
words that say Dave Randall all over them.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe I should be the one to take this particular question. Okay, so the native integration with ServiceNow gives you the ability to view incidents in the context of a device that's being managed by Intune. So you go to the troubleshooting blade, and there's a tab there that you select ServiceNow, and it gives you a list of all the incidents that are associated with that user of that device. So the native ServiceNow integration really doesn't help you accomplish this particular task, which is performing a selective wipe. So in order to do this, there's a couple of options that you have. In ServiceNow, you can build automation that calls into Microsoft Graph. So from within the ServiceNow incident, you can build out a capability that makes a call to Graph and does the selective wipe of a particular device. You'd obviously have to pull that device from your CMDB so that you knew the specific device identifier. And using the Service Graph connector from ServiceNow for Intune, you can pull in all of the device information so that you would know the specific device ID from Intune. So you have to put together a few pieces of the puzzle there. The last thing is on Graph API, in order to do the selective wipe via Graph API, there is a call for that. If you, I'm going to give you a couple of pieces of information. One, if you go to the reference material for Graph, start with developer.microsoft.com and go to the Graph information. The API reference is there. But the other way that I really like being able to figure out exactly what the console does is go to an unmanaged device in the console, get to the point where you can do a selective wipe, and then press F12 to go to developer tools. That will pull up a window where you can actually trace through all the individual Graph API calls. It's a lot of data if you haven't ever looked at that. Fiddler is another tool that you can use, but grabbing the specific API call will give you exactly the information that you need to know in how to do that scripting from ServiceNow, or maybe you want to use your own tool for selective wipe. But those are the capabilities in how you can do a selective wipe programmatically, either from ServiceNow or just using Graph API.
I love that F12 developer tools in Edge or your browser of choice tip, because you can, everything in Intune on the console is kind of running in Graph behind the scenes, and by initiating an action and then hitting F12 or pressing F12 on your browser, you can see what's happening behind the scenes. Like you can see all those grab calls. So it's a good tip.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite tools, and I love watching people's eyes light up when they see that for the first time. They're like, "Oh, you just opened the treasure box of of jewels and how to make all of this work." So, all right, on to the next question from Troy and from Tech Community. Thanks, Troy. Can you briefly explain the differences between Graph API, PowerShell, and Azure Automation runbooks in the management and troubleshooting of Intune enrolled devices? Also, which would be best to use for custom anomaly detection of enrolled devices? Thanks again. All right, so I'm going to split this one up, and let's start with the custom anomaly detection. Zeneb, is that one that you can take?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we have today is anomaly detection will kind of like collect all that data and signals that we have on your devices. For multiple signals that are looking at your apps and then devices, drivers, OS upgrades, and things like that. And then it'll kind of like use our statistical models and machine learning models to bring to your right attention like all those signals, and then put them into like high and medium anomalies to low and informational. So as for now, they're not like, we can't customize like which specific anomalies or signals you're looking at, but this is great feedback that we can take as we are building this experience.
Excellent, thank you. Anybody else want to tackle the first half of this, or is this a Joe, you're going to throw it back to Dave?
I was going to throw it back to Dave. And in the meantime, I do have some noise outside, so I'm going to disappear for a second so I can go shut my windows. I'll be right back.
Yeah, go take care of that. All right. So Graph API is a set of APIs that you can call, for the most part, using pro developer tools. So if you're using something like VS Code or Visual Studio or ADO to build applications, you can call the Graph API natively. And that will allow you to do automation of any of the tasks that we do in Intune. And by list of tasks, I mean anything that you can do in the UI, there's a Graph API behind that, as Joe had mentioned. So if you're doing kind of professional level development, Graph API is typically where you would start. For a lot of our IT pros, PowerShell is the scripting language of choice, and there is a specific module for Graph for PowerShell, so you can add that module into your local PowerShell, and then you can make Graph API calls using PowerShell commandlets. So if you're building scripts in PowerShell, that's a great way to have direct access to the Graph APIs in a PowerShell friendly manner. Azure Runbook Automation also has hooks to Graph API, so you can make the same calls from Azure Runbooks, and as well Power Automate. There's a connector for Graph for Power Automate. So I kind of equate Azure Automation Runbooks with Power Automate. If you're using either of those two capabilities, they allow you to make the graph calls. So the difference between Azure Runbook and PowerShell and Graph API and Power Automate is mostly the flexibility of the tool set that's there. Graph is like gives you all full capability. PowerShell wraps it in a set of commandlets, so you've got to follow the PowerShell format for all of that. Azure Runbooks and Power Automate give you some really nice no-code, low-code options for visual building of your flows. And so I think especially if you're getting started with some scripting, take a look at both Power Automate and Azure Runbooks as a way to build simple scripts that can connect directly to the Graph API to do whatever you want for managing or troubleshooting your device. So management oftentimes is making changes. Troubleshooting is gathering information, and both of those types of actions are available via Graph.
And we have other things that like Dune is working on that we're not actually allowed to talk about just yet, like specifically, but we have other new cool stuff coming into the Intune console and behind the scenes, but coming into the console as well.
Is this once again your plug for Ignite, Joe?
I don't know if we're even announcing at Ignite. We're announcing soon though, but yeah.
Okay, got it. All right, question now from another Joe. How do you troubleshoot errors, not conflicts, with config profiles, where the error tab in Intune only shows a generic 65,000 error code? Sometimes there's an error type of 2.
I assume, Joe, that you're talking about applying a configuration profile on a device. And I think I would start at the device and the MDM diagnostic logs is probably where I would start. But if you're looking at in the console, Zineb, is there anything in the advanced endpoint analytics that could help with troubleshooting anything that's happening on the device as applying a configuration profile?
I would say for now, that's not something that we have, but we would have potential plans to add on more compliance and config policies to device timeline.
Okay. But yeah, so I think I would start off on the device with the MDM diagnostic logs. You can get those in settings, worker school account, and follow that down to the MDM diagnostic logs and look to see where the error happened.
All right, question from Madeline. I have duplicate devices in Intune, device IDs, after unenrolling and then re-enrolling under a different user. They don't appear in my devices list, only when I'm adding specific devices to a group. I search device ABCD and there are 5 different device ABCDs with different device IDs, yet only one of these are active currently. How do I purge these old device IDs?
So we have automatic cleanup rules. So you can clean up devices that way through the automatic cleanup rules. But I think I'm going to go back to a question that Liz asked earlier, and how are you enrolling these? Because if you're doing something like an autopilot reset on these, I don't anticipate that being an issue where you would have 5 different device ABCD. If you do an autopilot reset 5 times, I think it would still be the same device. So I would go back to how are you enrolling it to see that, and just remind you that we do have the device cleanup rules for old devices that are no longer active. Liz, I saw you nodding your head.
Oh yeah, I would agree that sometimes whatever your enrollment method is might change it. So particularly if you are using Autopilot as your enrollment method, even if you kind of go through sort of the remove from Intune management or factory reset, it's a good idea to still delete both the Intune device record and the AED device record. So if you go to AED and navigate to the device and delete that device record, then hopefully all your bases are covered and you won't get that issue anymore.
Thanks, Liz and Joe. All right, so I'll do a little bit of a pause here. We've got a lot of Autopilot questions, and we do have folks that are answering Autopilot questions in the chat. But what I wanted to say for everyone, we will continue to answer questions in chat after this live session. So if you've got additional questions, maybe you go back, talk with some of your coworkers today, and they've got a question and you missed the opportunity to ask that question. Please feel free to add that to the chat. We will be monitoring the chat at least through the end of today and tomorrow. So our Autopilot folks will have an opportunity to jump in and provide the information in there, even if we don't have it directly in this conversation. And that kind of applies to all the topics in addition to Autopilot. So even though we might not have an expert in the group right now, we'll make sure that your questions get answered before we finally close the question feedback time. All right, so Kasaba has come back and has a little bit more feedback. Thanks, Kasaba. I know that the Apple-related session is coming next, but from the troubleshooting perspective, it would be pretty useful to be able to use exit codes for macOS-related scripts. Now, Intune provides you information on script logs in the device if the script ran successfully or if you see it's failed. Wouldn't it make sense to be able to define exit codes to let Intune collect the output and give you the desired state in the scripts report?
I'm going to say yes, that absolutely.
I was going to say,
great
yep,
idea.
I love that.
And thanks for that feedback. As Dave said earlier, we love to hear the feedback. And as our producers are going to put up there, aka.ms Intune feedback for all the feedback. We really, that is a place where our developers go, our program managers go, our product managers go, which are two different things, program managers and product managers at Microsoft. So we all go in here. And of course, there's other ways you can reach out to us on Twitter and LinkedIn and whatnot as well to give feedback. But we prefer the Intune feedback or even the in-console feedback, in the Intune Admin Center where you can just click for the feedback as well. But yes, it absolutely makes sense, Saba.
Yeah, I'll say one more thing about the Intune feedback, the send a smile, with the smiley or the frown. All of our product managers get that feedback pulled in, summarized by areas of the product every week. So it's a great opportunity, and I'll just say, even though you may be having an issue and you might feel frustrated and you want to do the send a smile, please do. Right? If there's something that's frustrating you and you're unhappy with it, please send that. But also, I've seen lots of feedback where people are recognizing changes that we've made and really happy with those. And those are just gold for us to know exactly what direction we want to continue to go, because we're always evaluating areas that need to change. And it's really good to know not just the areas that need improvement, but what you really like so that we can do more of that. All right, next question from Michelle. Is there a place where Microsoft lists all the policy, and that's both group policy and Intune settings, that we are planning to make obsolete? A few times now, settings have gone obsolete and caught us out.
That's a good question. Yeah, I'm sorry, Liz, go ahead. That's how you start to talk.
Oh, I was just going to say, not that I know of, there's not a central place sort of within the configuration settings where you'll see that. And sorry that has kind of caught you off guard before. But I will say anytime that a setting is becoming obsolete, there is kind of a rollout of it. And so kind of on the main dashboard, if you keep an eye on the news section, and usually, there's a lot of different product blogs, customer success blogs, but there's also going to be deprecation notices there as well. So kind of keep an eye on that, and hopefully that'll help give you enough heads up.
Yep, and the aka.ms Intune new page, which is everything new in Intune, which would include deprecated features. So we don't mean just new features, we mean what's new. So that new could be a deprecated feature. And probably the message center and the admin center would list anything that's going to be deprecated. Again, Michelle, I'm sorry that happened to you and you were caught by surprise by those deprecated settings. Offhand, I can't think of anything that have been deprecated recently. We might have moved things around, but I can't think of anything offhand that was deprecated recently. But yeah, I would check the Intune new. I would check the message center, and again, any news in the portal would be helpful as well.
Yeah, sometimes as we're deprecating older or dropping out of support older versions of operating systems, there are also sometimes replacements for configuration settings that will deprecate functionality out of those older operating systems, and they end up getting carried forward into the new ones as well because there's new replacements. So that's just a statement to say, also take a look at what's newly supported, because there may be replacements that for configuration settings or group policy settings that trigger deprecations in older ones. All right, let's see. Next question from Ryan. Hybrid Azure AD joined device, when going through Autopilot, creates 2 devices in Entra. From what I have read, that's expected, but wondering if that's correct, and if so, are there any recommendations to identify these separately from each other? Love that question.
I love that question because it gives me an opportunity to say we don't want you doing hybrid Azure AD through Autopilot. It's something that we, of course, we make available. We've made it available since December 2018, and it continues to be available. It's just not a best practice, right? So it does allow me to give that just that shout out that we want you to do hybrid Azure AD. Of course, if you have to do that during a transition to cloud native, then you do that with your existing devices. But your Autopilot devices, we would hope to be Entra ID joined or Azure AD joined. That said, yes, it is true that that does happen. The reason why, or the best way to identify, I think I'm going to let Hung, who's, I think it's Hung that's answering some of the Autopilot questions in the background. I think I'm going to let him kind of type out that answer. It's probably more than we can say here on the screen.
But you do bring up a good point about hybrid AADJ, and I think I've seen a lot of customers who are using hybrid AADJ. It certainly seems like it's a great transitionary solution, but I agree. I would encourage people to move to just Azure AD joined.
Yeah,
I think it's
sure.
the direction.
If your existing devices that you're moving to Intune, sure, they should be hybrid Azure AD joined. New devices, Autopilot reset devices, all those devices, would love for you to start your cloud native journey. Azure AD joined or Entra ID joined devices for anything new or newly refreshed.
All right, moving to a question from Robert. Is there a report that will indicate devices where the primary user is not Intune licensed? Not every user at our organization is licensed, and we have users that move to other departments, which drops them from our Intune license group. When this happens, the device still shows as enrolled in Intune. However, it no longer deploys configuration profiles to the device because of the licensing issue.
That's an interesting one. There is not a report for that as far as I know, but that's a really interesting scenario that I hadn't actually heard about before. So I'll take a note of that. That's great feedback. Like I said, just another plug. We're kind of working on addressing a lot of these different data issues, or even sometimes these pieces of data are there, but there's not a good way to slice and dice them the way you're talking about, where, okay, which of my primary users are not licensed. So this is such great feedback for us. So I'll make sure to take a note of that.
Yeah, that's an interesting way in which users become unlicensed. I've seen some other situations where we've had one Azure AD security group get removed from a parent group, and that ended up causing devices or users to become unlicensed and had ill effects. So this one, I like the fact that this is just kind of a business process where you've got users that move to other departments. So that's a great use case for us to follow up on. Thanks, Liz, for taking the action on that. All right, question from Martin from LinkedIn. Some of the configuration profiles provide zero feedback in terms of errors. Failed SCEP provisioning is one section regardless of platform. Ideas on how to troubleshoot?
I'm going to start right away and say that's a good question. I don't know how to troubleshoot failed SCEP. It's not something that I've had to worry about in the past. So I love the question, Martin. I just don't know the answer to it.
Yeah, and I don't know whether this is one of the things where collecting device diagnostics is actually going to solve the problem, because it kind of sounds like Martin's gone down the rabbit hole of getting to the bottom of all of the logging and so forth, and is looking for additional information. So
I think I can plug one thing that we're working on. Most of you, I've seen a lot of the questions coming in that have to do with something we call the Microsoft Intune suite. One of the tools that we're working on the Microsoft Intune suite is a cloud PKI, where you no longer will need to use SCEP. It'll all be done differently, cloud-based. So there's something to look forward to as well. Not that I'm telling you shouldn't troubleshoot SCEP. Just wait for a cloud PKI. But it is not officially branded name, by the way. When I say cloud PKI, Again, my name is Matt Call, right here, Matt Call. It's just the name that I'm using internally right now. But anyway, so it is something that we're working on that'll help with those types of things. But again, troubleshooting the current SCEP issues, that's not something that I know how to do. So I apologize.
All right, we've got one question from Jamie. We're finding machine records in Intune disappear. We don't use device cleanup rules, and it doesn't seem to matter Windows or Mac. When this happens, the machine gets conditional access blocked for compliance. We need to delete the Azure AD record and enroll in Intune again. I believe this is happening due to the Defender for endpoint integration and trying to re-enroll devices. Intune logs do not show any person deleting the record. Where can I find logs to help?
I'm actually thinking you might have to open a support case for that. That's not something I've seen before. It might be MDE doing it. I don't know if and Jamie, I don't know if you've tried opening a support case in this before, but I do think a support case might be warranted here. Liz or Zeneb, Dave?
Yeah, I would agree. I haven't heard of that, and it does sound like an issue worth opening a support case for.
Yeah, to me, the kicker is that you're not using device cleanup rules. I mean, that'll clean up the Intune managed device object. We don't do a cascade delete of the Azure AD device. I know that's a point of feedback that we've taken. So, yeah, I agree. Probably a good support case here. So we're getting close to the end of our time together here with everyone. And I just wanted to give Liz, Joe, and Zeneb an opportunity to give some final thoughts on either your favorite troubleshooting features, some things that customers can use, take back with them from this, or anything else you'd like to share. Liz, start with you.
Yeah, well, I'll put a plug for it because I see it just showed up on the screen as well. The Customer Connection Program, you can join it at aka.ms/join-CCP. You know, some of the things that we're talking about here today, but we're not saying too much about, we do talk about in the CCP group. It's kind of a first look at a lot of these things and a way to get involved in things like private previews, give your feedback really early. So would definitely recommend that. And kind of a similar plug for just kind of looking out around Ignite timeframe. Like Joe said, there'll be a lot of different blogs, a lot of different announcements. So a lot of the things you folks were mentioning today, we have some new solutions to kind of address. And then I think just kind of my last piece too, because one theme I saw too were folks kind of talking about, oh, this thing is deprecated or this thing is going to be deprecated, so I'm having an issue with this. And so, a lot easier said than done, but I would say, when you see kind of a new way of doing something come out, that usually means that's kind of like the direction we're investing in. So again, easier said than done, but I would kind of try to migrate to those things as soon as you can. And then hopefully you'll kind of run into less issues.
Awesome, thanks. Zeneb?
Yeah, on my side, I'll say the plug is we just released anomaly detection device cohort, so it's generally available for all our Intune Suite customers, and that's very exciting. So I hope that some of you here were able to explore it, and please let us know if you have any feedback as we build this experience. So right now where we are is we show you all those like signals and anomalies, and now we kind of like bring them together and show you like device cohorts. So it's kind of like subset of devices, and they have like specific factors in common. So that whether that's like a specific faulty app version or like a driver version and things like that. And then you're able to like drill down and see the root causes for those devices, and then use device timeline as a troubleshooting tool as well. So yeah.
Awesome, thanks.
Y'all are stealing my thunder here. I was going to mention
Joe,
everything y'all mentioned. So I'm just going to say thank you for joining us and get it right back to Dave.
Yeah, this has been a great session. Thank you, Liz, Joe, and Zeneb for joining. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. Again, we've got the opportunity for you to continue to submit questions, and our subject matter experts will answer those questions throughout the next day and a half. So thank you for joining. Please consider joining the next 2 Tech Community Lives that are happening right after this one. Have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are in the world. And thanks again for joining.
Yeah.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks, everyone.